and welcome to episode 44 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. After we look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week, got something a little different for you this week. This is my cat Pookie on plant guarding duty. She's guarding a beautiful young blueberry plant there, and she seems to be a little bit relaxed on the job. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the United States this week, thousands of prisoners applied for President Obama's drug clemency program. More than 18,000 U.S. prisoners completed electronic surveys last month to apply for reduced sentences under President Barack Obama's new program designed to clear federal prisons of nonviolent offenders. The Federal Department of Justice in April announced a major new initiative that solicits petitions from inmates who have served more than 10 years for a nonviolent crime. Most of these crimes are drug-related. Federal prisoners are always able to petition the president to have their sentences commuted, but the new program is intended to give a break to those who were sentenced under the draconian mandatory minimums of now defunct drug laws that increased the federal prison population by 800% since they were passed during the Reagan administration. Before the new program, about 18,000 federal prisoners had applied for commuted sentences over the previous 12 years combined, and now we have 18,000 since April. This clemency program is part of Obama's transformation from granting the fewest pardons of any modern president in his first term to potentially commuting the sentences of thousands of nonviolent drug offenders in his second term. Such a potentially large grant of clemency hasn't been seen since President Gerald Ford offered amnesty to Vietnam-era draft dodgers back in 1974, 40 years ago. Justice Department officials stressed that many of the 18,000 prisoners who applied over the past month for the clemency process do not meet the requirements. Many of the applications will never make it to the pardon attorney's desk, much less President Obama's. Initial screening of the 18,000 petitions will be done by a group of public defenders and legal advocates called Clemency Project 2014. They'll try to find the best applications and send those on to the Office of the Pardon Attorney in the next few months. So far, the Clemency Project has received 18,000 completed surveys, but none of these have yet been screened at all. So we can't speculate as to how many of these will meet the criteria, said Vanita Gupta, Deputy Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union and leader of the Clemency Project. The Office of the Pardon Attorney was already overburdened with thousands of unresolved pardon commutation requests before President Obama's program was even announced. Ronald Rogers, who had headed the office, was pushed out in April as part of an overhaul intended to reduce that backlog. Rogers was criticized in a 2012 Department of Justice Inspector General's report for mishandling a certain high-profile clemency petition. During Obama's first term, Rogers recommended denying nearly every single petition for commutation that reached his desk. House Republicans last week voted to block funding for more staff for the Office of the Pardon Attorney, despite the 18,000 petitions, claiming the clemency program is an overreach that benefits drug dealers. The Bureau of Prisons delivered the clemency survey to more than 200,000 federal prisoners beginning on May 5th. The survey includes a warning in capital letters that there's no guarantee inmates' petitions will be granted and that commutations remain very rare. Justice Department officials said the number of inmates, in addition to the 18,000, may have incorrectly submitted their clemency petitions directly to the department, losing their chance to have a pro bono attorney. Neither the DOJ nor the Bureau of Prisons would comment on how many prisoners submitted applications incorrectly. Also in the United States this week, TV ads called out congressional opponents of medical marijuana. The medical marijuana advocacy group, Americans for Safe Access, is running 30-second TV advertisements on MSNBC in Maryland and South Florida over the next few days to draw attention to members of Congress who opposed medical marijuana reform in last week's House vote. One of the ads focuses on Representative Andy Harris, a Republican from Maryland, who spoke out on the House floor against a measure that restricts Justice Department funds spent on medical marijuana enforcement in states that have legalized its use. Despite the recent passage of a medical marijuana law in his state of Maryland, Representative Harris made the claim Friday that marijuana is neither safe nor legal. The other ad focuses on Democratic National Committee Chair Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democrat from Florida, who was one of only 18 House Democrats to vote against the medical marijuana measure last week. Notably, Representative Wasserman Schultz voted contrary to several other Democrats in her own South Florida delegation. A recent poll indicated that 88% of Floridians support medical marijuana. That's expected to pass before the end of the year. The political advertisements are part of the Vote Medical Marijuana campaign, which includes an interactive online tool that provides voting statistics and a report card for each member of Congress. You can find that at votemedicalmarijuana.org. A project of ASA, votemedicalmarijuana.org provides details not only on last week's vote, but also on other medical marijuana-related measures, like the recent House budget amendment that would have allowed Veterans Affairs physicians to recommend medical marijuana to their patients. The Vote Medical Marijuana campaign will help the public better understand how their member of Congress votes on these issues, so they can use that information when they go to the ballot box, according to ASA Executive Director Steph Scherer. Our elected representatives in Congress are making policy decisions on medical marijuana that affect millions of patients in the United States. ASA is offering to produce similar advertisements in the other congressional districts where elected officials voted against the budget amendment to restrict DOJ enforcement in medical marijuana states. VoteMedicalMarijuana.org will better educate supporters in casting their ballot for candidates who have their best interests in mind, according to Scherer. For more than a decade now, polls have shown that 80% of Americans support medical marijuana. Unfortunately, such popular support is not reflected in the way that Congress votes on this issue. Representative democracy, anyone? Advocates hope that VoteMedicalMarijuana.org will help change that political conflict. A survey this week showed that 84% of Americans say driving after drinking is worse than driving after toking. That's right, Americans believe it's worse to drive after drinking than after smoking marijuana, according to this new survey. Querying 1,000 internet users nationwide in a Google survey during the month of April, just over 84% of those polled answered alcohol to the question, which is worse, driving after drinking or driving after smoking marijuana. What's interesting about these findings is that despite the public's wide acceptance of drinking alcohol, especially wine and beer, there's a conflict in attitudes about how it impacts behavior, according to international performance and learning trainer Sean Locke, who conducted this survey. While there's little stigma towards drinking in public versus smoking marijuana in public, there's a very different opinion when it comes to alcohol versus marijuana and driving. An avid wine enthusiast and president of WineCraftsman.com, Locke focuses on how certain choices impact human behavior. He said he's been fascinated by the public's debate on issues surrounding alcohol versus marijuana. Attitudes toward marijuana and driving were related to age, according to the survey. Nearly twice as many respondents over 65 felt marijuana was worse than did respondents in the 18 to 24 age range. These findings are interesting in that states with younger populations might be more accepting towards legalizing marijuana, whereas states with older populations might have a challenge, according to Locke. Income level also affected attitudes toward cannabis. 100% of respondents who make more than $100,000 a year annually believe that driving after drinking is worse than driving after toking. In my world, this is interesting because wine enthusiasts tend to be in the upper income bracket, attending wine events and wine vacation tours, Locke said. But a majority of Americans who make less than $25,000 a year also said it's worse to drive after drinking. We can only speculate at this point, but it's possible that lower income Americans realize the extreme costs that can occur in their lives when caught drinking while driving, according to Locke. Now, suburban Americans were similar in also believing that driving after drinking was worse than driving after smoking pot, with 79% of respondents saying alcohol is more dangerous. Locke suggested that the reason that this number is 5 percentage points lower among suburbanites than among respondents overall may be the result of concerns about the social stigma related to marijuana use, as compared to the more socially acceptable status of alcohol consumption. As the president of the website winecraftsman.com, Locke focuses on working with winemakers. He said the reason for the survey was that everybody, whether they make their own wine or not, can identify with the issue and the ongoing debate over the impact on society of alcohol use versus marijuana use. What would be interesting, according to Locke, is to find out how Americans feel about growing their own cannabis at home versus making their own wine at home. In some circles, it raises your status to be known as a winemaker, whereas growing marijuana can have its own set of impacts on friends and associates. A summary of the survey results, complete with charts, can be found at winecraftsman.com. In South Africa, the Daga Party is challenging the marijuana ban. South Africa's Daga Party has called for the Cape Town High Court to postpone all marijuana cases as the party challenges the ban on cannabis. A number of cases have been put on hold over the past year as the South African government is called upon to justify its laws banning marijuana, known as Daga, in South Africa. According to party leader Jeremy Acton, Acton believes that a precedent has been set and a temporary stay on marijuana prosecutions must be offered across South Africa until the cases which challenge the constitutionality of marijuana prohibition are settled. The application doesn't seek to prevent marijuana arrests, according to Acton. It just seeks to put the prosecutions on hold, since the cannabis laws haven't yet changed. This will grant ordinary people equal rights to those who have been given the right to stay their prosecutions. Thus, citizens' rights are upheld, according to Acton. It will instantly reduce the massive costs of prosecutions in the courts, but may, if prohibition is not overturned, lead to a backlog which may have to be caught up with later, he said. It will affect the court roll, said Jacques Sibomana, spokesman for the National Institute for Crime Prevention and the Reintegration of Offenders. People will be kept in limbo, not knowing whether or not the prosecution will continue, he said. Some cases may fall through the cracks and dockets will get lost, he said, and it will be an administrative nightmare. But Acton said the stay won't cause problems. I do not foresee any harm to society arising from the granting of the order, but I do see a lessening of harms and costs to society in the immediate and long term, which arise from the prohibition and which are substantial, Acton said. Prosecution for cannabis is more damaging to anyone than the cannabis itself. If this order is granted tomorrow, prosecutors nationwide could instruct the police to only concentrate on cultivation and larger quantities, but to confiscate smaller amounts without charging the person, according to Acton. That would minimize the harms for the ordinary user. This should maintain a balanced legal situation while the future of Daga is considered in the courts, Acton said. We are in a process of change in South Africa regarding attitudes toward Daga, especially since the truth about Daga as a medical, nutritional, industrial, and energy resource has become known, Acton said. A granting of this application will be a massive lifting of the oppression being faced by thousands daily and really set the stage for legalization and regulating of Daga for the public benefit. In California this week, 2 medical cannabis dispensaries announced that they are offering free seizure medication for children. 2 Northern California medical marijuana dispensaries announced they'll be giving away free high CBD tincture medication for children suffering from seizure disorders. In the wake of the recent tragic death of 6-year-old Charlie Nelson in Utah, after she was denied cannabis extract known to help control seizures caused by her neurological disorder, Dave Spradlin, co-director of Magnolia Wellness in Oakland and River City Phoenix and Sacramento, has announced that he will provide for free the expensive extract to any patients with a similar ailment. This medicine is a scientifically produced liquid made from marijuana plants and used to treat people with severe seizure disorders. The tincture is rich in a chemical called cannabidiol, or CBD, but low in THC, the main psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. CBD is a non-psychoactive component of marijuana that is known to possess a wide range of therapeutic benefits. It is proven to be especially effective in the treatment of seizures brought on by neurological conditions such as Batten disease, which was blamed in the death of Charlie Nelson. People are really suffering, and this product has been known to cut seizures from hundreds a day to just a few a week, or none at all, according to Spradlin. Many in the medical community feel this is an effective alternative to conventional pharmaceuticals and can dramatically improve a patient's quality of life. The treatment is expensive and not usually covered by insurance. That's why we'll be providing it free to any families with a doctor recommendation, said Spradlin. A formula designed specifically for seizures is available for any parent who comes in with a note from a doctor that says a child patient is being treated for seizures, according to Spradlin. They are then entered into the dispensary's record of patients that can receive free medicines, and they will get as much medicine as they need at no charge. The tincture, also known as cannabis-based medical extract, or CBME, is available at both Northern California dispensaries that Spradlin co-directs. That's Magnolia Wellness in Oakland, California, and River City, Phoenix in Sacramento. In Tennessee this week, the governor signed one of those CBD-only study bills into law. Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam signed a very limited CBD-only medical marijuana study bill into law last Friday. Sadly, this bill may not ever result in relief for any patients at all. Senate Bill 2531 creates a 4-year study on the medicinal benefits of cannabidiol, a non-psychoactive component of marijuana. The bill specifies that Vanderbilt University will conduct the study, and Tennessee Tech will theoretically grow the cannabis. As has been the case with similarly weak CBD-only legislation passed in other conservative states recently, the many limitations of the bill mean that it won't result in relief for patients. Tennessee hasn't become a medical marijuana state by any stretch of the imagination. The law foolishly depends on the cooperation of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, in authorizing the cultivation of marijuana in Tennessee for the study. It's as if those who wrote the bill haven't bothered to inform themselves of the fact that the DEA has never authorized anyone except the University of Mississippi to grow cannabis in the past 50 years. CBD-only laws leave most potential medical marijuana patients to suffer. CBD has been found effective in quelling seizures, but those treating seizure disorders with medical marijuana are only a small percentage of total patients who could benefit from cannabis. There is also some evidence that CBD works most effectively in conjunction with THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and the other cannabinoids in the plant, known as the entourage effect. Programs in other states which depend upon federal cooperation have failed to help any patients. Maryland, for example, abandoned a medical marijuana program adopted in 2013, which would have required teaching hospitals to distribute cannabis to patients after no such institutions were willing to go against federal law by participating. Maryland wisely rejected that unworkable law in April, becoming the 21st medical marijuana state, in addition to D.C., that allow patients actual access to cannabis without asking the feds if it's okay. Although some activists argue that any form of medical marijuana legislation is a step forward, other advocates feel CBD-only bills merely serve as a delaying tactic by cowardly politicians who wish to appear to be doing something in the face of overwhelming support for medical marijuana, yet are afraid to pass an actual medical marijuana law. In Minnesota this week, a message was delivered to the governor by mothers whose children need medical marijuana. Medical marijuana patients, their family members, and supporters gathered in front of the residence of Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton on Friday to express their disappointment with the medical marijuana bill he signed into law one day earlier. That group delivered 33 flowers to the governor, each representing 1,000 seriously ill Minnesotans who will not be allowed to benefit from the new law, but would have benefited from a more effective proposal that was blocked by Governor Dayton. Among that group were Heather Keynes of Duluth and Shelley Olander of Brainerd. The new law will not allow Keynes' 2-year-old son Parker to access medical marijuana to treat a painful movement disorder stemming from a congenital brain malfunction. Olander's 6-year-old son Lincoln, who suffers from a mitochondrial disease that causes severe nausea, wasting, and vomiting, will not be able to access medical marijuana. Medical marijuana has been found to be an effective treatment for both children's symptoms. Medical marijuana won't cure my 6-year-old, but we hoped it would ease his persistent nausea and quell the vomiting associated with it, Olander said. I am heartbroken that conditions such as his were excluded from the final language. We will continue to fight for my son and the tens of thousands of others across the state who will not be able to use the medicine that could help them, Olander said. About 5,000 Minnesotans will qualify for the new medical marijuana program, according to a legislative analysis of the House bill on which it was based. Governor Dayton blocked a widely supported and more effective version of the law, and that would have allowed about 38,000 seriously ill Minnesotans to access medical marijuana, instead of just 5,000, according to a legislative analysis. The governor promised to veto any bill that did not have the support of law enforcement associations, and they opposed the more effective proposal. He gave law enforcement veto power over medical decisions. Law enforcement was neutral on the final bill that was approved, which included several restrictions upon which Governor Dayton had insisted. The final version of the legislation will not allow individuals suffering from intractable pain, nausea, wasting, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, to access medical marijuana. Keynes' son would have qualified to use it in the treatment of intractable pain. Olander's son would have qualified to use it in the treatment of nausea and wasting. Enactment of this legislation is bittersweet, Olander said. I'm happy that some of my friends might finally get the relief they need, but so many others, such as my son, will not. We are saddened by the governor's decision to put law enforcement associations' interests ahead of patients and their families, she said. They were joined at the event by Jessica Hauser of Woodbury. Her son Wyatt suffers from epilepsy, which is a qualifying condition under the new law. I'm grateful this law may help my son, but disheartened that it won't help so many others, Hauser said. These moms, children, and adult patients with debilitating conditions are just as deserving of effective medical treatment as my child. I hope legislators will improve this law next year so that every sick person who could benefit from medical marijuana will have the right to do so. Before we go this week, there is a must-read story you really should check out on Toke Signals. It's the second contribution there by a young writer and comedian named Michael Hain. And he is examining the phenomenon this week of the weed fairy. And the story, Weed Fairy is great, but is she good for legalization? The weed fairy first came to national attention in October of last year after taping small bags of marijuana to flyers in and around Brooklyn on telephone poles in order, she said, to lift spirits. Usually, Michael Hain says lifting spirits in Brooklyn either means you're being ironic or offering free beard implants. And since recreational marijuana is still very much illegal in New York, the weed fairy had to be very discreet about it. But she has now moved to Seattle, where things are a lot more open, and she is doing the same thing, leaving marijuana in public places on flyers attached to telephone poles in Seattle. He takes a look at this fascinating phenomenon in his article, which you can find on tokesignals.com this week. I hope you have a great week. If you do as I do over the coming week, you're planning to stay lifted. See you next time.